The existence of Ethiopia as a united nation has never given comfort to Egypt since millennia. Because of this, Egypt tried to invade Ethiopia more than once. However, the vigilant Ethiopian rulers didn't allow that to happen. As a result, Egypt was defeated in all its attempts. When Egypt discovered that it couldn't defeat Ethiopia, it started to play malicious games that could undermine or threaten the very existence of Ethiopia. Why is that Egypt is so restless and obsessed in weakening Ethiopia? Now, it's obvious, and the whole world knows that it's because of Nile River. Apart from trying to harm Ethiopia in several national and international economic and political arenas, Egypt tirelessly worked and is working to dismantle Ethiopia, if possible, and if that can't happen, to weaken it so that Ethiopia cannot use its resources, especially the Nile River. Some of the tactics Egypt is employing is finding or creating distance, providing them with training, arms, media outlets, finance, and anything that it believes bleed Ethiopia. From this fact, one can safely conclude that Eritrea is the project of Egypt. In 1991, as a result of the collapse of Soviet Union, the then ruling party, Ethiopian Workers' Party, lost the ideology it was based on and the military support it received. In addition to that, because of economic meltdown and the myriad armed groups sprawled all over the country, the government of Colonel Mengistu Haile was toppled and the Eritrean People Liberation Front took control of Eritrea. When Eritrea seceded from Ethiopia, it was Egypt who was indulged in euphoria and went frenzy more than Eritreans, because it believed that apart keeping Ethiopia in conflict indefinitely, by denying it access to the Red Sea, it inflicted serious damage to Ethiopia. Eritreans, on the other hand, believed Eritrea would soon become the Singapore of Africa, because throughout their struggles they had been told that Eritrea would have oil, gold, seashore, and other resources that would make them rich. Eritrean People Liberation Front also believed it won the war against Ethiopian army not as a result of national and international situations that prevailed during that time, but because its army was courageous, proficient, and superior. These feelings of EPLF and Eritreans didn't take long to fade away. The first blow to EPLF's arrogance took place in 1998 during Ethio-Eritrean War. Before that, EPLF believed its army was invincible and it could take on any army. But the war that took place in 1991-98 deflated EPLF's illusion and cut it short to its size. For that matter, when the war broke out, EPLF had well-armed, well-trained, and well-organized army in contrast to Ethiopia's largely militia, underarmed, and not well-trained army. Ethiopian army not only administered a severe blow to EPLF in a very few days, it also sent a clear message that the very existence of Eritrea was in danger. If it hadn't been for Meles Zenawi, the then Prime Minister of Ethiopia, the present Eritrea could have ceased to exist as a country long time ago. Hello viewers, this is Oromotopia Media, and I am Dawit Amansisa. If you are happy with this video, please subscribe, like, and share. Ever since then, one can tell that Isaias Afwerki has never slept well. The cause for which he struggled for several decades has come under real danger. As a result, he bent on building a large army. This means as Eritrean population doesn't exceed 3 million, in fact, according to Mr. Getachew Radda, Ethiopian minister in charge of East African affairs, Eritrean population is not more than 2 million. Building a large army that has big number is difficult to come by. This led to the conscription of Eritrean youth non-stop, sending them to Sawa, a military training camp, and keeping them in the army for more than a decade or even for lifelong. The promise of making Eritrea the Singapore of Africa vanished in the thin air. Let alone making Eritreans rich, even putting a loaf of bread on the table has become a formidable challenge. The resources that had been talked about was not found. Because the youth are kept for military purpose, labor force that could produce food or items is not there. Large portion of the land is uninhabitable and barren. This means it doesn't yield crops. Eritrea cannot industrialize itself because it doesn't have the capital. Now, Eritreans are surviving on the remittances that it receives from Eritrean diaspora and the revenue it generates from exporting mercenaries. Another tactic Eritrean government adopted to avert the collapse of Eritrea is, just like its creator, Egypt, to train, arm, and finance the dissidents in Ethiopia. However, it seems that this tactic doomed to fail because the armored combatants operating in Ethiopia are being battered harshly by Ethiopian Defense Force. Some are in disarray and others are barely exist. While things are going this way, Dr. Abiy Ahmed just a year or a couple of years ago announced that Ethiopia needs to have access to the Red Sea. For Eritrean government, this announcement is a tragic blow that turned its concern into a nightmare. At present, the issue of access to the Red Sea is a predominant agenda in Ethiopia. During the previous regime, talking about Red Sea was a punishable offense. But today, in coffee shops, restaurants, hotels, offices, factories, farmlands, army institutions, etc., Red Sea is the day-to-day talking point. People don't whisper, they talk loudly and firmly. As a solution to this problem, Dr. Abiy Ahmed put on the table the idea of give and take. Ethiopia to get access to the sea, and Eritrea to have a share from Ethiopian Airlines, Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, Ethio Telecom, or any other profitable company that it chooses. Nevertheless, due to Isaias Afwerki's stubborn nature, the give and take principle didn't materialize. Having been fed up of Eritrean government's give deaf ear policy, now Ethiopian government is bent on diplomatic and propaganda offensive. On the top of that, high-ranking government officials and the military commanders are amplifying the Red Sea motto. Again, in addition to that, almost all Ethiopian people are singing and dancing to the Red Sea rhythm. They say the secession of Eritrea was the outcome of conspiracy. They are indignant because they believe what happened to Ethiopia was unjust and unfair. The government of Ethiopia is presently pushing the issue forward vehemently. It has listed down the causes how Eritrea seceded and why Ethiopia is in dire need of access to the Red Sea. Among the causes, 1. The referendum that was held in Eritrea was a sham. When there were several options to choose from, EPLF forced Eritrean people to choose from freedom and slavery. Is there a same person who chooses slavery? What is more, Afar people didn't participate in the referendum. 2. The then transitional government of Ethiopia, as it was not elected by the people of Ethiopia, it didn't have the mandate to endorse the secession of Eritrea. It didn't have the mandate to decide on the fate of a nation. 3. According to international law, Ethiopia has the right to sea access and to use or extract the resources found therein. 4. as the import and export activities are heating up because of the gearing up of Ethiopian economy, Djibouti's port couldn't accommodate. As a result, Ethiopia has to stop exporting while importing, and vice versa. 5. As the Red Sea region is getting more and more volatile, it's necessary or it's a necessity for Ethiopia to assert its presence in the Red Sea, to avert any attack on its soil or on its interest. The vehement push of this agenda by Ethiopian government and the people is denying Eritrean government peace and stability. What could the response of Eritrean government to this menacing threat be? It can't wage war against Ethiopian army to preempt or avert the imminent danger because its army is no match to that of Ethiopian. Eritrean army is built by disgruntled high school boys who are kept in a lifelong prison. The boys didn't apply or request to be a soldier. They are forced to be in the army. They don't have any cause to fight for unless for keeping a dictator in power. Second, the Eritrean army is armed with outdated weapons of 1990s that it acquired from Egypt and some Arab countries. Third, so that Eritrea is in abject poverty, it cannot carry and sustain the crushing burden of the looming war, especially if the war goes on for months. Fourth, as the population of Eritrea is very small, if the army at the front line is depleted, there is no replacement. The Eritrean government called on citizens who are 60 years old and below to join the army, and now it's stretched to the limit. On the other hand, Ethiopia has built a very huge army, especially since the war with TPLF, Tigray People's Liberation Front. The army is well armed with electronic warfare systems, missiles, war jets, and other conventional heavy weapons. Now it's manufacturing and repairing most of its weapons. It produces rifles, bullets, including cannonballs. It also manufactures drones in large scale. The soldiers and the commanders are battle-hardened and proficient. On top of that, the soldiers chose to be soldiers and have a very strong cause to fight and die for. Having understood this fact, now Eritrean government has resorted to a brinkmanship. It's trying to intimidate Ethiopia to refrain from its move. It does this by mobilizing the majority of Eritreans and by going into a coalition with Tigray People Liberation Front. The tragedy is that Tigray People's Liberation Front is not an entity to count on. It's already battered, destroyed, and toothless. Apart from that, it has split into splinter groups and facing a wholesale rejection from Tigray people. So, the idea of brinkmanship is not working. Finally, what is the solution for this looming, real, and near crisis? I think the only way forward is negotiation. It is true that Isaiah's stubborn nature doesn't allow him to negotiate. Nevertheless, in the face of such a colossal danger, he must negotiate on the principle of give and take. If that doesn't happen, the consequence would be far-reaching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Thank you for watching.